The phenomenon known in engineering terminology as metal fatigue is the most deadly link in this cycle. This is because removing a bearing or axle system that has traveled thousands of kilometers and whose structural integrity has been compromised and mounting it on another wagon reduces that part's load capacity and durability to an unpredictable level. OSON data and technical analyses clearly show that the use of such cannibalized parts increases the risk of derailment and catastrophic accidents by 300%. Imagine that small, worn-out metal part cracking on the wheel of a train carrying 60-ton tube-lengths or explosive ammunition in the freezing cold of Siberia. At that moment, it's not just a train accident. The logistics line to the front turns into a disaster that will shut down for weeks. And these issues also directly impact RZD loading capacity. According to leaked RZD reports and industry analyses, 93% of the current decline in loading in Russia is directly attributable to locomotive shortages. This internal decay within the system is accompanied by asymmetric attacks from outside targeting the nervous system. Ukrainian intelligence and partisan cells within Russia are not trying to derail massive trains. They have chosen a much cheaper, much smarter target: relay cabinets. These grey metal boxes standing right next to the tracks are the electronic brains of signaling switches and traffic flow. When a partisan opens one of these boxes with a crowbar and $5 worth of gasoline and sets it on fire, all traffic lights in that railway block automatically switch to fail-safe mode. According to data verified by @News, more than 145 such acts of sabotage and arson have occurred across Russia and on the European border. When these cabinets burn, the system goes blind. Trains must stop. Passage is only possible in manual mode via radio commands at a snail's pace of 10 km/h. Military logistics, which should flow at 80 km/h, suddenly comes to a standstill. A queue of hundreds of trains forms behind. Without firing a single bullet, the partisans managed to reduce the Russian army's supply speed by 80% with just a lighter. Technical bankruptcy inevitably turns into an economic and systemic heart attack. Russian Railways is not just a transport company, it is the backbone of the Russian state. This backbone is currently being crushed under the weight of a financial collapse. RZD net loss for the first 9 months of 2025 and its 40% cut in investment programs reveal the scale of the crisis. The giant, having run out of money, made huge increases of up to 20% in freight rates in order to stay afloat. This increase was the final blow to the Russian economy. Already struggling with inflation, the cost of transporting coal, grain, or steel from Siberia to Moscow has increased so much that local producers have begun to declare bankruptcy. This economic crisis has brought with it a dramatic human resource meltdown. RZD is experiencing the biggest personnel crisis in its history. Qualified machinists, maintenance technicians, and signaling engineers are resigning from RZD en masse. The reason is simple. The Kremlin has raised salaries in the arms manufacturing sector to astronomical levels in order to increase production. Why would a railway worker repair tracks in freezing cold when he can find a job at the Urinvagonzavod tank factory with triple the salary? To stop this exodus, RZD has started forcibly calling retired engineers back to work and lowering staffing standards. But there is a fatal problem here: technology. The train operated by a locomotive engineer who retired 30 years ago was a Soviet machine with analog controls and simple gauges. Today, RZD modern locomotives are computers managed by digital screens, complex software, and automatic braking systems. It is impossible for a 70-year-old worker to manage this digitalized system and for their reflexes to adapt to it. This situation not only slows down trains, but also causes the risk of accidents and systemic errors to increase exponentially. The ripple effect extends from the civilian economy directly to the front line, to the soldier's helmet. The fuel crisis, which began with the bombing of refineries, combined with the collapse of the railways, created a complete logistical vicious cycle. Under normal circumstances, the shortfall from a hit refinery would be covered by fuel brought in by train from another region. But right now, the railways are blocked. Fuel tankers are waiting behind those broken locomotives, stuck in the middle of Siberia. Tanks at the front are running out of fuel because the arteries feeding them are blocked. The Russian commander in Donbass may think the lack of ammunition is due to production shortages, but the reality is much more painful. That ammunition was produced and loaded onto wagons, but the locomotive that would pull those wagons has turned into a pile of scrap metal thousands of kilometers away, waiting for parts. Russia's rail freight transport has fallen to its lowest level in 15 years due to these bottlenecks. This data is not just a statistic. It is proof that a war machine has come to a halt. With the debt crisis of Russian state-owned companies peaking in 2025, RZD inability to pay suppliers has even dried up the black market for spare parts. When cash flow stops, the wheels stop turning. And right now in Russia, that massive logistics belt running from industry to the front lines has come to a grinding halt. The Kremlin's famous turn to the East strategy, designed to evade Western sanctions, is now gasping for breath under the wreckage of its own railways. Putin's geopolitical plan B was always to rely on those massive steel arteries, the Balamar and Trans-Siberian railways, to carry military economic support from China and North Korea. However, these lines are currently experiencing the greatest strangulation effect and bottleneck in history. The daring operation carried out by Ukraine's intelligence service, the SBU, in the several Musky tunnel in the heart of Siberia, blew up not just a concrete tunnel, but Russia's only gateway to Asia. To understand the depth of the strategic checkmate, 3 points must be examined. The Simursky tunnel is Russia's only transit point. This 15 km structure is the most critical and sensitive node of the BAM line. By striking this point, the SBU trapped Russia's military supply and fuel shipments in a bottleneck thousands of kilometers away. This means that the Russian army is halted not only at the front, but also at its logistical starting point. Sabotage on the famous Devil's Bridge, the alternative route Russia tried to use after the tunnel was disabled, completely paralyzed the line. This is proof that the weakest link in Russian railway doctrine, namely the singlet-track, non-redundant architecture, has collapsed. Trains are no longer moving, they are just piling up. This is the main reason why millions of artillery shells from North Korea cannot reach the front. Kim Jong-un may be supplying ammunition, but Russia no longer has the capacity to transport this ammunition 9,000 km. Trains are stuck for weeks on single-track railways due to burning signal boxes and broken locomotives. In logistics science, this is called the bottleneck, and Russia is now a victim of its own geography. Those vast distances seen as strategic depth at the beginning of the war have now turned into a logistical nightmare. This situation marks the collapse of the Kremlin's decades-long endless source of manpower and ammunition doctrine. Russian military doctrine is based on overwhelming the enemy by continuously pumping new resources to the front, regardless of the losses. However, when the pipeline pumping these resources bursts, the abundance of resources becomes irrelevant. Tanks rotting in Siberian warehouses or bullets manufactured in factories have zero strategic value unless they reach the front lines. More importantly, this collapse ends Russia's claim to be the Eurasian bridge. China has shelved its plans to ship goods to Europe via Russia because no one wants their goods to burn, be stolen, or be stuck indefinitely in Siberia. Putin's dream of placing Russia at the center of global trade has vanished in the smoke of a burning relay cabinet. This is economic suicide, not only for today's war, but also for Russia's next decade. Moscow is now an unreliable, fragile, and technically bankrupt logistics route, and neither military victory nor economic prosperity can be transported on this route. The essence of the matter is this. The power of an empire is not measured by the number of missiles it has, but by the wheels of the trains that carry those missiles. And today, those wheels are not turning in Russia. A $10 bearing crisis has crippled a billion-dollar army. Those small sparks that ignited the relay cabinets have reduced the Kremlin's strategic plans to ashes. When the iron veins are severed, it doesn't matter how large the body is, death is inevitable. Russia's logistical heart is faltering, and this arrhythmia heralds absolute collapse on the front lines. So, what are your thoughts on this matter? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay informed about PPR Global's latest exclusive analyses, please subscribe and remember to turn on notifications. Thank you for choosing.